Should Penn State start Drew Allar or Beau Pribula at quarterback against Ohio State? How about both of them?
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Nittany Lions. I'm your host, Zach Seyko, and thanks so much for making us your first listen and watch every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. He is Dylan Callaghan-Croley over on the other side, Penn State Rivals editor. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. Dylan, we are debating if Penn State should start Drew Allar at less than 100% or a 100% Beau Pribula. Who gives the best chance against Ohio State? And then what happens regardless? We need to, not regardless of the outcome. Let's look at if Penn State wins versus a loss to Ohio State, what happens? But let's start with that debate. Allar or Pribula? I'm going to go middle of the road here, Dylan. I think they should actually play both 50-50. And it helps when you have a coordinator like Andy Kotelnicki, who has run two quarterback systems successfully. Given the injury circumstances and Drew Allar not being one, he's not 100%. We know that for a fact. But it's also Ohio State week. This element of surprise, the way that they would have to game plan for two different playbooks is going to be challenging for Jim Knowles and the Buckeyes.
Yeah, no, I think the uncertainty of who's going to be a quarterback on Saturday is actually a plus for Penn State heading into this game, because Ohio State now has to prepare not just for one quarterback but two quarterbacks. And I know Beau Pribula isn't the quarterback that Drew Allar is. He doesn't have the ceiling, he doesn't have the arm, but he is a quarterback that can help move this offense down the field. We saw that against a good Wisconsin defense this weekend. What he was able to do while on the field. That was our first extended look at him really as Penn State, as a quarterback at Penn State throughout his career, and it was impressive overall, in my opinion. When it comes to Saturday against Ohio State, I think if Drew is able to move around enough in the pocket that he's going to be able to escape some pressures and not be a statue back there, then I think he needs to get the majority of the reps. I think 80% Drew gives Penn State a better chance than 100% Beau. And I think that's just because the arm that Drew, has and the arm talent that he has. And that's nothing against Beau. I think Penn State can win this game with Beau Pribula at quarterback. I really, really do.
As the full-time guy, correct?
As the full-time guy.
Okay.
But it would not be – it would be a much more difficult game to win with Beau, I think, at quarterback than Drew. And that just, again, comes down to the level of quarterback. Drew is a potential first-round pick, a potential future NFL starter. Beau is a college quarterback, and he may –
as an uphill battle to the NFL.
Yeah, he may end up being a really good college quarterback, but he's not going to be an NFL starting quarterback. He's not Drew. So I think 80% Drew is better than 100% Beau, but I do think with Beau in the offense and what Andy Kotelnicki's style has been over the course of his career, I think there is an avenue for success on Saturday with Beau. But if Drew is good enough to move around, then I think he has to play the majority of the game. I'm sure Beau will get his fair share of snaps as well. But, I think if Drew is anywhere close to being able – if he's in a spot he can be mobile enough, then he has to be the one on Saturday.
The mobility is key because if Drew cannot extend plays, if Drew cannot slide in the pocket, that's going to be a serious issue, let alone the fact that he can pick up 5 to 10 yards if you don't have a quarterback spy on him. So Drew Allar does a lot of things. Even though he's not a true dual threat mobile quarterback, he can move. And I don't think defenses still respect that enough. However, if this knee injury is more serious than we're led to believe, then I absolutely am comfortable with Beau Pribula leading the offense on that given day. I think one way or another, Ohio State just has its work cut out for them. You have to prepare for either starting quarterback because James Franklin is not going to say, "Oh yeah, he's fine. He's going to be the quarterback." Ohio State can take the risk and say, "All right, we're going to prepare like Drew Allar's the starter." That injury didn't look so bad against Wisconsin. But what if, on the off chance he isn't, and Beau Pribula is playing
Yeah,
100% of the game, and then you
yeah,
just went the entire week preparing like it was Drew Allar, and you're getting a completely different quarterback and a completely different playbook that Andy Kotelnicki is comfortable calling to Beau Pribula's strengths.
yeah, and it would be much more similar, I think, to the Kansas offense that we saw last year with
Absolutely.
Jalen Daniels. And I will say we are recording this, a little bit ahead before it comes out on here on Thursday, but and no inside info here, just my gut. I would probably, if you put, maybe pick right now if Drew or Beau is going to start on Saturday, I'd honestly probably lean that it's going to be more likely Beau, just because it's we don't know the exact nature of that injury that Drew had. It could be a lot more minor than it seemed, but you got to be careful with knee injuries.
Yes.
And we're going to talk about this, but this game for Penn State, while it's a big game, kind of means a whole lot less now that they beat Wisconsin last week in the grand scheme of things.
Yes.
It's not it was never going to be an elimination game, but the room for error now for Penn State down the stretch here
Right.
is much bigger. And, would Penn State rather risk, putting a hobbled Drew out there against Ohio State when Beau still gives you a chance to win? And if you put a Drew out there in a hobbled state, you're potentially risking further injury. And, Drew has, decisions to make of his own in terms of his future, and a significant knee injury could absolutely derail his future as well. So there's a lot at stake here. And I'm glad I'm not at the Penn State coaching staff, because this is a hard decision to make on Saturday of who's going to be the quarterback. And I know James said it's going to go down to a game time decision, and I do believe that as well. But
Yes.
But ultimately, again, no inside info, just based off my opinion, I think we likely see Beau on Saturday as the starting quarterback. But yeah, if Drew can go, he's gonna have to be able to move. But also, we saw that knee injury and how it affected his passing immediately afterwards. Now, obviously, that was right afterwards, but he definitely was off the mark on that one downfield pass attempt with that bad knee. So yeah, it's going to be interesting, because you got to factor that into it too. If he can't really use that leg as needed to get the ball downfield, that's another factor you have to add into this beyond just being able to move. Beau Pribula will be able to move the ball at times on Saturday, but I already think it's going to be a low scoring game for the most part. So it'll be interesting to see just what happens there, that quarterback position. But I think that's a couple of things to also keep in mind here with that.
No, that's important for Drew's ability to push the football down the field. You're compromising not just his mobility, but potentially those deep throws, because I don't know that Beau Pribula is going to open up the aerial attack. I think his legs open up avenues to get some quick passes, some easier passes, but to sit back in the pocket and just say, hey, we're going to be able to target somebody deep like a Tyler Warren or an Amari Evans, which we've seen consistently from Drew, one way or another. That's why I think you can get the best of both worlds in this game if you run the two quarterback system against Ohio State. If Drew Allar's not 100%, but you play him strategically and efficiently and allow Beau Pribula's abilities to be involved in this game, that's why I think that might be Penn State's best game plan. And Andy Kotelnicki is just going to have to call a heck of a game. Same thing with Tom Allen, because I don't exactly like that matchup against Ohio State's wide receivers and Penn State's defensive backs. But Penn State can win this game. This is a 3.5-point spread. Just because Ohio State may seem like the better team on paper, the Nittany Lions can win this game. We're not exactly going to make a prediction here, but we're going to look at what happens if Penn State does win, what happens if they lose. We'll talk about it on the other side of this break. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet just $5 and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL, and it's all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, and it's all on the same page where you place your bets. Just got to visit FanDuel.com to join today. And if we look at the lines for Penn State versus Ohio State is a 3.5-point favorite, minus 184 on the money line. Penn State is 152 on the money line. The total has actually moved down. It is 46.5 now instead of 47.5. If you like those lines, you can bet them now over at FanDuel.com. Again, you will get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Dylan, let's pick back up with the optimistic route that Penn State does win this game against Ohio State for the first time since 2016. A win for Penn State. It's not as consequential as it has been in years past if that was a loss, but we'll get to that in a moment. If this is a win, Penn State, hypothetically, theoretically, and realistically, should be able to go 12-0. They control their destiny from there. That's a Big Ten championship berth against probably Oregon. I won't count out Indiana in this case, but most likely Oregon. A 12-0 Penn State team, a 12-0 Oregon team in the Big Ten championship, and then let the chips fall where they may. What if Penn State wins that game? Then they easily get a first-round bye, and they're a top 4 team in the college. They're probably the #1 team at that point. In the overall rankings, because Oregon's #1 in the present, but that's what a win over Ohio State would look like. You are in the driver's seat for everything. Big Ten championship appearance, Big Ten championship win, and a first-round bye in the college. Not even a home playoff game, a first-round bye in the college football playoff.
Yeah, and slightly off topic here, but I believe the first college football playoff rankings come out next week, right after this matchup as well. So yeah, I mean, a win for Penn State absolutely, I think would put them in
it's historical.
It would be a historical win, and Penn State with a win, I think, would have a great argument of being the #1 team in the country in that first CFP rankings, because you have a win over Ohio State. But then not many teams in the country, if any, I think have 3 as good as Penn State's 3 road wins this season
against Power 4 teams. Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, West Virginia obviously and USC obviously have not been the teams that maybe we expected they were going to be.
They're still quality. They're still above average.
Yeah, still very quality programs. 2 programs that will have the opportunity to go bowling this season. West Virginia, yeah, it's been a tough season for them, but if you look at their losses, I think all
they're explainable.
Yeah, all explainable, and I think most of them have come against ranked opponents.
And Penn State dominated that team. That wasn't just a 3-point win, escape Morgantown. No, that was a dominant 34-12 victory on the opening week of the season.
Yeah. USC, Penn State obviously, came back at that one. USC still a quality team that, if USC plays their schedule again this season, they're probably, ranked right now. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And then Wisconsin, Penn State went into a hostile environment, run and won with a backup quarterback. So
back-to-back games too.
Yeah, yeah. And so they have a great argument for #1. But yeah, it would be a historical win. It would be a win that, gets Penn State over that proverbial hump, and I think is one that would be able to build a lot of momentum on the recruiting trail.
Yes.
Nittany Lions, obviously, for those who follow here on Zach's pod, but also over at Happy Valley Insider, Penn State's been hot on the recruiting trail. They're, have a great chance to flip multiple targets here down,
which we will talk about in the final segment.
Yep. Down the stretch here, and then they're in a good spot in the 2026 class already as well. So I mean, continue to build momentum on those recruiting classes. But I think national perception wise, it would be a big win too. Penn State's looked at as this program that they're always going to be a good program, but they're never going to be a great program. They can't get over the hump.
Elite.
Yeah, they can't be elite. So I think it would change the national perception as well. And I think another thing to add here is I think this is the first time in a long, long time between these two teams that the pressure isn't on Penn State.
Yeah.
Penn State can go into this game kind of pressure free. Yeah, the fan base is going to add pressure. The outside noise is going to add pressure. But if Penn State loses, it doesn't change anything. They can still go to the college football playoffs, assuming they win out. If they lose another one, it gets dicey. But if they win out, they're 11-1. You're setting yourself up for a great first-round matchup and a great quarterfinal matchup. And then if you get to do a semifinal, everything's on the table at that point. So a loss doesn't hurt Penn State here as much as a loss would hurt Ohio State. A loss for Ohio State puts the Buckeyes kind of on the bubble. And you would have questions about them going forward because they still have Indiana left on their schedule. Michigan. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's another thing to consider here is Penn State is kind of the pressure-free team here. But, yeah, a win would be massive for this program. It would be massive for the perception on the recruiting trail nationally and in just overall in the college football picture as where this program ranks going forward. Especially when you think about potentially, looking ahead to next year, how it may be a little bit more of a down season considering what they're probably going to lose. This is Penn State's time to take advantage of the roster they have, the team they have, and an Ohio State team that, for the talent they have, has a lot of question marks really late in the season and is not the team that we thought they were going to be coming into this season.
No, a loss doesn't jeopardize the season. I think in years past it was all, and I think Penn State to an extent, I don't want to say that they knew, but you kind of get that, hey, we got to punch above our weight class here if we want to beat Ohio State. We got to punch above our weight class here against Michigan. Penn State doesn't look at this game and say, oh, we should be underdogs in this case. No, they view themselves as the favorite with all the other factors in, home field advantage. The Buckeyes are definitely playing with a lot more pressure, as you have pointed out. It definitely has a different feel, and just kind of getting the Buckeye perspective of it, Dylan. I talked to my counterpart over at Locked On Buckeyes. The teams they're dealing with a myriad of injuries to key players. There was that was a questionable game against Nebraska. I don't put a whole lot of stock into that. I think Ohio State's looking ahead and doesn't put its best playbook out there against Nebraska. So I think they're playing the long game in that case with a tough schedule, but you're absolutely right. A second loss by Ohio State, Ryan Day's seat is going to be red hot. It's going to be on fire. And Penn State is still in control of its own destiny. You're 11-1, hypothetically, right? Could they lose to Minnesota? Yes, but it's going to take a lot. I would say that's the toughest game remaining on the schedule. But they're better than Minnesota. They're better than Washington. They're better than Purdue, Maryland. But I look at those games on paper. They're better than all those teams by at least 10 points, if not more.
No, and I think that's with or without Drew at quarterback.
Yeah, even if Beau Pribula has to play.
I may sound crazy here too, but say Drew doesn't play on Saturday, and this is one of those knee injuries that could be nagging. No matter what happens on Saturday, I think there's a conversation of how does Penn State handle the Drew Allar knee injury going forward if it's a nagging injury. Do they take their chances with Beau for a couple of weeks and try to get Drew fully healthy, or do they maybe send out a non-fully healthy Drew? Because I'll be honest, I don't know if Drew is going to get fully healthy. We obviously don't know the extent of this knee injury, but usually knee injuries have to be cleaned up at some point. I don't think it would shock anybody if we hear, a little bit after the season that Drew had some sort of minor knee surgery to clean up the knee or whatever. I don't think that would surprise anybody, but I think that would be an interesting conversation after this game and something that they probably will have to discuss going forward of how to handle that Drew injury. I think if it becomes a lot more difficult if they lose on Saturday, because then your room for error, margin of error is definitely a lot lower.
Now there's pressure on Penn State.
But if you win on Saturday, you got more or less 2 games of error to play with 4 games. And if Penn State loses 2 of the last 4 games, it's a disaster anyway for the program. But I think Penn State, looking ahead of it, should be favored in those last 4 games no matter what happens Saturday. So, a loss and they should beat all 4 of those teams.
Yes.
Minnesota, I agree, is the toughest game remaining because that is a scrappy Minnesota team, and that's a tough place to play. I mean, Huntington Bank Stadium isn't the biggest name stadium out there. It's never going to be on a top list, but Minnesota plays very well at home, and that's going to be a late November game. Who knows what the weather's going to be like?
It'll be tougher than anticipated, I think.
Yeah, I think that's going to be an unexpectedly close game for some people. But I think Penn State should do very well the rest of the way. So yeah, a loss on Saturday definitely would, I think, sting Penn State fans more than it would necessarily sting the program. The conversations would continue that Penn State can't win the big game, but
that's fine. The most important part of this is they'll still have the chance to prove it because they'll go 11-1. They'll host a home playoff game. No, they didn't get over the mountain that is the Ohio State Buckeyes, but everything is still out in front of them, and they would make the postseason with everything that on paper right now says that Penn State would do. So a loss doesn't jeopardize the season. Dylan, you already mentioned it, that they're going to get hot they're getting hot on the recruiting trail. Yeah. So let's talk about some of those potential flips that could be coming and when we can expect them on the other side of this break. Today's episode is also brought to you by 5 Hour Energy. Our friends over at 5 Hour Energy know that being a passionate football fan isn't just a hobby. It is a way of life. It takes a lot of energy to power through all-day tailgates, touchdown celebrations, or an agonizing second overtime. We know about overtime victories here for Penn State, right? Which is why they've created the Stan the Fan 5 Energy Shot with a special flavor called Fan Fuel. The energy shot made just for super fans like us. The fans who are first in the parking lot and last to leave. We see you over at 5 Hour Energy. And you know what else gave me a little bit of Nittany Lion fan fuel this past week was that Jalen Reed pick 6. Penn State absolutely needed that. That swung momentum back in the favor of Penn State against Wisconsin. It was that Jalen Reed interception pick 6 touchdown. 5 Hour Energy knows that no matter what team you root for, being a fan requires heart, soul, and a whole lot of energy. Whether you're prepping for the big tailgate, ironing your jersey, your game day to-do list is always a mile long. That's why the limited edition Stan the Fan 5 Hour Energy Shot is here to keep you fueled throughout the season. What's your fan fuel this week? Whatever it is, do it with a 5 Hour Energy. Available on 5hourenergy.com and shipped nationwide. So as Dylan had mentioned previously, Penn State is getting hot on the recruiting trail once again. If you prove it, the conversations for recruiting become a lot easier. So the questions about the passing game, the questions about Penn State being one of the better programs in all the country, not just talking a fringe top 10 team, but as Dylan mentioned, being a top 5 team, the proof is there when you actually do it and beat the opponents that you say you're going to beat. Ohio State would absolutely help even further in this case, but Penn State's already doing a lot of heavy lifting despite that game not even being played to this point. There's a projection out there that has Brandon Finney flipping away from now fellow Big Ten Conference team Oregon back to Penn State, where he was all projected all along. But I imagine the distance had to play a hand in that. Plus, James Franklin and Penn State never gave up on that. And we'll also talk about Andrew Olish. Again, the proof is there. Tyler Warren going for 17 catches, 224 yards against a powerhouse program in terms of brand recognition. USC, forget what they are in 2024, but USC is a top 10 brand. You do that against the Trojans on the West Coast, that's going to get the attention of other tight end prospects here. So Dylan, when can we, and will we see a flip from Brandon Finney and maybe Andrew Olish from Michigan to Penn State sooner rather than later?
I think Finney could be one that, is definitely on, I don't want to say on the cusp, but I think it's definitely becoming increasingly more likely that we see that soon. I wouldn't be surprised if Penn State tries to get him back on campus here for one of these next 2 games, whether it's this weekend against Ohio State or next weekend against Maryland. And I think the next time they get him on campus could kind of be that final nail in the coffin to get him to flip. I think, this is a recruitment that Penn State has. I think I came on this podcast shortly after Finney committed to Oregon. I said Penn State's not going to let this one go until National Signing Day. They're going to continue on him, chip away, and they've been chipping away. they've gained a lot of momentum with him over the last few weeks. I think this season plays a big part in their national perception, just not with Finney, but for everybody. It's funny because we like to say, one game doesn't really drastically change a recruit's mind, but one season absolutely could do so. Penn State has shown that they're a legitimate college football playoff contender, and maybe even more this season. And I think Finney could happen very soon. Olish is interesting. I think that one could potentially go a little bit more in towards December. I expect if he does flip, I do expect it to happen probably before the early sign-up period. Okay. But I think that one, we're still looking at a couple weeks. I know he's going to be on campus soon, and then I think he may have another visit or so after that scheduled as well. I forget his exact schedule off the top of my head. Let me see if I can find it quickly. But yeah, I think both are ones that would Penn State fans need to keep close eyes on over the next handful of weeks, especially Finney, and then a little less with Olish. But Penn State's going to continue there with Olish, of course, and is getting back on campus. So definitely one to keep a very close eye on.
And I'm very impressed by this, not only because of the pedigree of players and the programs that they're recruiting against. Again, Andrew Olish has been committed to Michigan since June, and Brandon Finney, it was a strong Penn State lean, and then out of nowhere, Oregon's able to get his attention. Yep. So that Penn State's been able to rally here in the middle of the season, and now the flips are projected. Again, never say never, but everything's looking and trending in the right direction here. But It's also the fact that Penn State's class of 2025 is loaded with defensive backs. And Brandon Finney says, you know what? I still feel good about joining this class of 2025. And Matt Henderson's already a tight end prospect that committed rather early for Penn State as well. And Andrew Olish is going to join, as he doesn't look at himself as the second tight end, but he will be one of two tight end prospects in this class. But the way that Penn State just continues to develop defensive backs, cornerback safeties, and tight ends overall, I mean, you could argue they are one of the best programs in the country, particularly with those two position groups.
Yeah, and I honestly forget if I said this on our podcast or have Valiants that are on your podcast, but if they do land Brandon Finney here, you're looking at one of the best position group hauls that James Franklin has ever had, maybe the best he's ever had, because you're looking at three elite defensive cornerbacks in Darius Dixon, Jameer Joseph, and Brandon Finney.
Absolutely.
And then two not to mention Josh Johnson, who could play cornerback or safety. And then you also have, Braswell Thomas as part of that group as well. And I didn't even mention Xavier Thomas. So, I mean, that secondary that Penn State is recruiting this cycle, and if they add Brandon Finney to it, it would be every meaning of the word elite. And you look at Ohio State's wide receiver room now and the future.
That's how you counter.
That's how you counter. That's how you stop them, is by going right up against them with elite talent on the other side of the ball, and that's what Penn State's doing in this cycle. And if they land Finney, I think he would be the crown jewel of this recruiting class.
He is Dylan Callaghan-Croley, editor over at Penn State Rivals, HappyValleyInsider.com. His links, his platforms will be down in the description. I encourage everyone to go check them out. Let us know your thoughts down in the comments section. Please leave a like on this episode. Dylan, thanks so much for the time as always and your perspective, most importantly with that recruiting intel for Penn State football.
Thanks for having me back on, Zach. I hope to be back soon.